الحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله وعلى آله وصحبه ومن والاه ثم ما بعد. اللهم اغفر لنا وارحمنا وأنت خير الراحمين. ربنا ظلمنا أنفسنا وإن لم تغفر لنا وترحمنا لنكونن من الخاسرين. اللهم نسألك رضاك والجنة ونعوذ بك من سخطك والنار. اللهم إنك عفو كريم تحب العفو فاعف عنا. اللهم انصر الإسلام وأعز المسلمين واعذ برحمتك كلمة الحق والدين. وآخر دعوانا أن الحمد لله رب العالمين. So resuming inshallah the seerah of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and we're going to do a quick quiz just to catch people up on where we are to see who remembers and who does not remember. So what year are we in of Hijrah? What year are we in? 5th year of Hijrah, mashallah, 5th year of Hijrah. Did you say that? We're going to start to score points now, mashallah. Okay. So in the 5th year of Hijrah, and we know that in the 5th year of Hijrah, one of the major things that happened was a ghazwa, very famous in Sirah, called Ghazwatul Ahzab. And it's also known as Ghazwatul Khandaq, just to go over it quickly, because today we finished Ahzab last time. Today we're going to talk about something else, but I just want to focus on how we got to where we are. Which, as we know, who went to Quraysh? Who went to Quraysh to instigate the war against the Muslims? The Jews of, the Jews of Khaybar, but they were originally from the leader of Banu Nadir. Banu Nadir were the last tribe to leave Medina, and Banu Nadir have a surah in the Quran. Which surah is this? So we attach the seerah to the Quran. Which surah al-Hashr, mashallah. Sayyidina Abbas radiallahu anhu said to call it surah Banu Nadir. This is his opinion. Sayyidina Abbas radiallahu anhu said, this is actually surah, but it's surah al-Hashr. So surah al-Hashr describes the jala of Banu Nadir from Medina, and as they leave, they're angry at what they left behind. And they go to the Quraysh, who are also an enemy of the Muslims, and they convince the Quraysh to go to war, and the Quraysh agree, and we know that ayat of the Quran are revealed in that, and then they rally up the Arabs, and a massive army is aligned against the Muslims. And as I say all the time, we need to, when we listen to the seerah of the Prophet ﷺ, the seerah of Islam, we should attach it to what happens today. What the Ummah still goes through the same kind of motions. People gang up against the Ummah. Some people supply weapons, some people supply slaves. This is what happened in Ahzab. Some of the tribes supplied weapons, some of the tribes supplied money, some of the tribes supplied slaves. The Quraysh had a fighting force, the Ghatafan had a fighting force. The Yahudis, by the way, did not have a fighting force in this. They were kind of the supervisors of what was going on, right? And we know that they went to Medina, and we know that it was the plan of who to build the trench? Salman al-Farisi radiallahu anhu. This was an unknown technique to the Arabs at the time, and the Prophet ﷺ adopted it immediately, and we talked about the lessons that we learned from the Prophet ﷺ adopting what we would call new technology. This was new technology at the time, right? And we know that this battle lasted for how long? By most books of Sirah. 25 days to 30 days. And this was in the extreme winter, so the Muslims don't have food, the Muslims are cold, the Muslims are not really ready. This had to be prepared very, very quickly. And who did the Prophet ﷺ before the battle go and re-seek an agreement from? What were they called? The Banu Qurayza. The Banu Qurayza. They were the major tribes left over, right? The major tribe left over at the time was the Banu Qurayza, right? So the first ones to have left Medina were who? Banu Qaynuqa. The second were Banu Nadir. Banu Qaynuqa left. Why? Why were they forced out? They incited the Muslim women, right? They insulted the Muslim women, and they didn't go back on this. The second were the Banu Nadir. What was the problem with Banu Nadir? They tried to kill the Prophet ﷺ, and then the third one, Banu Qurayza, were still there, and the Prophet ﷺ sought agreement from them 3 times to say, are you guys still in this contract, yes or no? Remember, we signed the contract to defend Medina. We signed a contract that every tribe, every deen would be able to apply its own sharia. For example, if the Muslims catch someone stealing, they apply their own sharia. Yahudis want to have a divorce, they apply their own sharia, no problem. So we're open to everyone, but ultimately it's the Prophet ﷺ's instruction that ultimately keeps Medina together. The rule of Medina, in general, goes back to the Prophet ﷺ. The fiqhi issues go back to each of the individual residents of Medina based on their deen. You understand? Okay. So the Prophet ﷺ, now what happens in Ahzab? What happens with the Banu Qurayza? They betray the Muslims. Okay. In any army, or in a country like the U.S. or any country in the world, when you catch a spy that is giving away military secrets, what do? You execute them. What if you catch a spy giving away military secrets at the time of war? You double execute them. Okay, what if you catch a spy giving away military secrets at the time of war and then going to attack your own army? You understand? And I just want you to understand this, because the Islamophobes will say about the Muslims, especially with respect to Banu Qurayza, all kinds of things. Like, this is an anti-Semitic deen. Oh, the Prophet ﷺ just killed them because they were Yahudis. None of this is true. None of this is true. And I'm going to remind you of this multiple times as we say the story of the Banu Qurayza. This is so important for us, especially in the West, because people nowadays still say this. They've always said this, but nowadays in America and in Western Europe and other places, they will say that, oh, look, they only did this because that's not true. This was a betrayal after a contract that was reaffirmed 3 times with the Prophet ﷺ in the middle of war. And by the way, who did they go after first? The Banu Qurayza. They went after the women and the children who were left in one of the forts of the Aus, south of the Masjid of the Prophet ﷺ. Right? Okay. So Ahzab is now over. Does anyone remember some of the nice dua the Prophet ﷺ made about Ahzab? I made a correlation between this and between this and Eid. Do you guys remember? Allahumma unzil kitab hazim al-ahzab. MashaAllah. Ihzimhum ya Rabbal Alameen. Okay, so this is one of the Prophet ﷺ. Which is the one we say in Eid? لا إله إلا الله وحده صدق وعده ونصر عبده وعز جنده وهزم الأحزاب وحده. This was after Ahzab, Prophet ﷺ, right? So when we say this in Eid, this is not, someone didn't make this up. This is what the Prophet ﷺ said after Ahzab, right? Specifically. Okay. So we talked about this dua of the Prophet ﷺ. So the Prophet ﷺ now, by the way, at the end of Ahzab, there's many lessons obviously in Ahzab. And how many people memorize Surah Ahzab? Raise your hand. Bismillah. MashaAllah. MashaAllah. This is better than the ratios I get in Map Seattle. So you guys are doing amazing, MashaAllah. So we need more. Okay, we need more. More people. Bismillah. Easy surah, go home, focus, Bismillah. I always tell people, what's the easiest way to memorize Quran? Who can tell me? Card writing, listening. Yeah, these are all good techniques. What do you think we have to do? Yes. Tafsir, mashallah, that's another really good one. Anyone else? Get rid of the junk in our minds and our hearts. All of this is good, what you said. But the first thing we have to do is get rid of the junk. We live in a world where we're bombarded by Facebook and Twitter and news and Instagram and Netflix and this. You understand? And if the brain is full of the junk, the good stuff never goes in. I always give this example. Let's say you have a glass. Let's say that this was a glass and I want to fill it. The glass is supposed to be empty. I want to fill the glass with milk. But the glass is half full with Coke. Coca-Cola. Muqata'a. Don't drink Coca-Cola. It's half full. And I come to pour the milk. And then it goes to the top. What's going to happen? What am I going to get at the end? What am I going to drink? You understand? But I need to first do what? Pour the Coca-Cola, clean the glass, and then fill it up with the milk. You understand? And then you can develop your own techniques. I love to, personally, I tell people, there's a technique personally that works for me, and maybe it works for others, call it 3 by 3. What does 3 by 3 mean? 3 ayat, followed by, all you have to do is memorize 3 ayat. Then you get the next 3 ayat. The next 3 ayat come from Allah. It's not from how smart you are, it's not from anything. It comes from Allah. The next 3 ayat will come from Allah, and so on. Does it have to do with how well you know Arabic? Does it have to do with how well you know Arabic? Knowing Arabic is not important. Raise your hand. Knowing Arabic, yes or no? Good or bad? It's good, but it's not required. It's not required. What's the evidence for this? We're now on a tangent. What's the evidence for this? The evidence is in the Quran. What does Allah say? وَلَقَدْ يَسَّرْنَا الْقُرْآنَ. Allah made it easy. Allah saying He makes it easy. Wallahi, my brother and sisters, there's a sister just today. My wife was telling me about. She's mashallah a sister. She's accepted Islam. She's an older sister. Her father and mother were not just priests. They were what do you call them when they knock on the doors to convert you? The missionaries. She lived most of her life in India. She's a sister here from Issaquah. She's a sister that lives in Issaquah, Washington. And most of her life was in India because the parents were missionaries. This sister alone, she became a Muslim maybe 3-4 years ago. She memorized half the Quran. She may not read it perfectly, but she doesn't understand. But look at the example. Look at this example. Allah, it puts us to shame. Anyway, alhamdulillah. So the Prophet ﷺ now goes back to Medina. So the battle is over. Oh, I didn't answer the question. What is the key thing we learn about Ahzab? What kind of battle was it at the end? Like, was the battle the same as Badr? It was different than Badr. How was it different? Because no preparation. Okay. How else was it different? Yeah, no major clash. So in other words, they were fighting, but Badr was huge armies attacking each other. Ahzab wasn't like that. Ahzab was the Muslims defending and the Quraysh and the Ahzab trying to penetrate. So the Muslims were defending. Okay, the Muslims were defending. But at the end, it was a battle of what we would call patience or sabr. At the end, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala teaches us a lesson here that at the end, it has to do with the patience and the iman on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Even though Surah Al-Ahzab, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala describes the situation of the believers as saying what? زَاغَتِ الْأَبْصَارِ وَبَلَغَتْ Like, this is a tough situation for the Muslims. But yet they held out and this is how the victory from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala came. Right? By the way, how did Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala help the Muslims in this battle? The wind and the angels. But they didn't, to be clear, the angels didn't do much fighting. This is different again to Badr. In Badr, the angels fought. In Ahzab, they didn't have to fight. You understand? Okay. So the angels can have multiple effects in a battle, by the way. The angels, when they descend on the believers, what kind of effects do you think they can have? So Badr, they fought. What other kind of effects do you think they can have? Fear, sakina, bringing down calm. This is also the effect of the angels, right? And one of the famous hadith in Surah Al-Kahf, mashallah alaykum Allah. And Surah Al-Kahf, the Prophet ﷺ, one of the hadith mentioned of Surah Al-Kahf, is a companion, Br.Aala. He goes to the very famous hadith in Surah Al-Kahf. Does anyone know this hadith? What does he say to the Prophet ﷺ? Ya Rasulullah, I was reciting Surah Al-Kahf. And then I saw lights that were descending down. You know how you say like a chandelier, like a big chandelier coming down. And when I would recite, the chandeliers would come close. I want to stop reciting, the chandeliers would go up. And then it came so close that the horses started to neigh. The horses outside started to, how the horses get sick. And the Prophet ﷺ said, what to him? Tilka sakina. He said, this is the sakina. And the ulama translated sakina as the angels coming down when we recite the Quran. As just one example of the effects of the angels. Okay. So the Prophet ﷺ now goes back to his home. The battle is over. The Prophet ﷺ is wearing armor. And the Prophet ﷺ, before he enters his house, Jibreel alayhi salam is there, and he said, why are you taking off your armor? The angels are not done yet until we get to Bani Qurayza. Bani Qurayza is in the south of Medina. Bani Qurayza at that time is about 2 hours from the Masjid al-Nabawi. But now it's very fast, you have a car. At that time, it's about a 2-hour walk or like a horse trot or whatever from Masjid al-Nabawi. So the Prophet ﷺ, infamous hadith, and we're going to spend a minute here. And I'm going to ask you a lot of questions, so I want you to think really hard. Okay? So the Prophet ﷺ said what? He went out and he said to the believers, I didn't know if you were raising your hand or your son was raising his hand. Okay, so what is the famous hadith of the Prophet ﷺ? لا يصلين أحدكم العصر إلا في بني قريظة. So the Prophet ﷺ said, following the example of Jibreel alayhi salam and the angels, don't pray Asr until you get to the Bani Qurayza. And the people around them heard, but they went and they told the rest of the Sahaba coming back from Asr. Everyone's coming back from Asr. I can't imagine. Like, it's been a month, man. I want to eat. I want to take a shower. You understand? This is the situation, Sahaba kiram radiallahu. So they all hear the message and they all start to advance towards Bani Qurayza. They don't all go together. Some people are ahead, some people are in the middle, some people are behind, right? So they don't all go together. Okay. So Some of the companions on the way, we know the story, they say, it's Asr time, we should pray Asr now. And they said, someone said, no. They said, the Prophet ﷺ said, don't pray Asr until you get to the Bani Qurayza. So it doesn't matter that it's Asr time. Other companions said, but that's not what the Prophet ﷺ intended. That's not what he meant. He meant get there quickly. He meant get there quickly. Make sense? Makes sense. Okay. Let's now come to learn. We're going to talk about this. Let's now come to learn. What was the reaction of the Prophet ﷺ when he heard from both sides? Because the first thing you do, Rasulullah ﷺ, he comes on and goes, Ya Rasulullah, yeah, I prayed with my brother here. He said, no. He said, well, let's wait until you go. And he, it's not Asr time. It's Asr time already. Some people said, we understood you meant get there quickly, so we prayed on the way. Question number one, what did the Prophet ﷺ say? He accepted them both. Huh? He said nothing, mashallah. That answer is closer to the correct answer. The ahadith that say he accepted them both are not entirely correct. So the Prophet ﷺ said nothing. Why didn't he say anything, you think? Not to create division, okay? Allow for differences in understanding, okay? So here's now a fiqhi question. Here's a fiqhi question. Because we use this a lot. We say, the Prophet ﷺ said this, and people understood it both ways. So, from a Muslim perspective, you're a Muslim. We all say, La ilaha illallah Muhammad Rasul. Is there one truth or more than one truth? Okay, how many people say only one truth? Okay, so I'm going to assume this is about 20% say there's one truth, 80% say there's more than one truth. But then how do you explain that the Prophet ﷺ didn't give an opinion about either of them? If there's only one truth, he could have said, you're wrong, they're right. But he didn't do that. So, Bismillah, think. Tafadhal, Habibi. He may not have wanted to create a division. Okay, that's a possibility. Okay. Yes, Tafadhal, Habibi. What is it? Both obeyed the order of the Prophet ﷺ. Each one understood it in their own ways. Yes? There's no point in the Prophet ﷺ identifying the right from the wrong in this particular case, because this was a one-off situation. He wasn't ever going to say to them, don't pay off until you get to Bani Qurayza again. Do you understand? If this was a recurring issue, like, I don't know, an order of washing your feet first or washing your hands first, and the Prophet ﷺ would have given an opinion. He said, no, you wash your hands first and wudu before you wash your feet. This is the sequence of ordering. Do you understand? But this was a one-off situation, and the Prophet ﷺ didn't want to criticize either side. It had gone and it had passed, and the intention is clear. So this gets back to also the intention. Like, no one comes to the masjid. People, alhamdulillah, we all prayed Maghrib after our day. No one came to the masjid with the intention of, I don't know, drinking from that water fountain as priority number one. You understand? We came here first to pray Maghrib. Alhamdulillah, if you want to drink, Bismillah, you should drink. But that's not the problem. You understand? So in Islam, there's one truth, right? There's one truth. There's not multiple truths. The fact that people understood them in different ways does not make them sinful. And the evidence is from what hadith of the Prophet ﷺ that this is all true. The hadith of the Prophet ﷺ where he says, إِذَا اجْتَهَدَ الْحَاكِمُ فَأَصَابَ فَلَهُ أَجْرًا. If one of you, or hakim in this case means the ruler, but if the imam or the ruler or even the father of the family is also an imam, you and your family are an imam. If you have a younger brother, you could be an imam if you're traveling. If the imam makes, they make a particular judgment call, and they get the answer right, then they get two rewards. But if they get it wrong, what does he say the rest of the hadith? فَلَهُ أَجْرٌ. They still get a reward. They're not sinful. So the Prophet ﷺ, this is from the generosity of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala on this ummah of Allah. You make an ijtihad and you're correct, you get two ajr. You make an ijtihad and you only get one ajr. But he didn't say that they are sinful. And we have to understand, my brothers and sisters, especially living in America, these are the companions, radiallahu anhum. These are people far superior to us. Their level of knowledge and their accomplishment, they made them 50 million times better than any of us, you understand? So we're at a time, unfortunately, in America and sometimes in the West, where people call themselves modern day Muslims or reforms. I don't know if anyone's ever heard of that. Don't waste your time looking for it if you haven't. But there's a wave out there where everything's good, everything is halal, just like, it's like whatever the feeling of the day or of the month is. We're not like that. We follow the sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ. We follow Islam as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala revealed it. So we're not like those people that everything is halal and everything is like, have a way at it like you like. But in Islam, you can make the ijtihad. Obviously, most of the ijtihad has to come from people of knowledge, right? People of knowledge. Right. What are the categories in Islam, by the way, that we know of to be haram and halal? Who can tell me? Halal on one side, haram on the other side. What's in the middle? Huh? Yeah, but what's it called? The technical term. Makruha and mustahab, mashallah. Okay, so things that we do fall in one of these four things. You understand? You can't have a thing that's halal and a thing haram at the same time. Okay, we agree. Okay, all right, good. So, and this, by the way, also leads to other opinions. Like, for example, the Prophet ﷺ has a hadith where he says, a sister should not travel on her own for more than 3 days unless she has a mahram. But nowadays we can say, look, I took my wife to the airport in Seattle. I put her on the plane. She's flying to Egypt, and when she gets to Egypt, her brother or her family will pick her up, and this is a safe destination. You understand? So some people also have this. By the way, I'm not blaming anyone. I'm not saying it's haram or it's halal. I'm just giving you modern day interpretations of how this applies to our deen. You understand? So for us, what do we take away? We take that we shouldn't be so hard on each other. Oh, but this brother said this is exactly what I'm going to do. And this brother said, no, that's not. Let's not be so hard on each other as an ummah. You understand? Okay, alhamdulillah. So bismillah. So we talked about the example of the one traveling without a mahram. We talked about giving each other a break, and qualified scholars being able to do that. Okay. So the first person to get to the Banu Qurayza, and the Banu Qurayza were a massive fortress, was Sayyidina Ali ibn Abi Talib radiallahu anhu. And when he got there first, the first thing he did was he planted the flag in front of the fort. Planting the flag means it's war. Planting the flag means it's war. Like, we're not leaving here until this is ours. So Ali ibn Abi Talib radiallahu anhu planted the flag. Ibn Ishaq, who's one of the most authentic narrations of the hadith of the seerah of the Prophet ﷺ, he said that the Banu Qurayza got up to the top of the fortress and they started to curse the Sahaba, they started to curse Sayyidina Ali radiallahu anhu, and they started to curse the Prophet ﷺ. They using really foul language. By the way, from the manners, again, compared to today's culture, from the manners of Ibn Ishaq, for example, right? They would never repeat the things that were said. Nowadays, Trump went to court and he said blah, blah. Like, we're not like that as Muslims, especially when there's evil things. We don't go repeat it word for word. That's not how we are. That's not the behavior of the Muslim. You understand? So the Prophet ﷺ is now on his way to Banu Qurayza, and he meets a group of companions. And he says to him, has anyone passed here before me? Has anyone gotten here before me? And they say, yes, Ya Rasulullah. Dahya al-Kalbi just passed ahead of you, and he was riding a white mule. Do you guys remember Dahya al-Kalbi? Jibril, mashallah. So Dahya al-Kalbi was one of the most handsome men of Medina. Right? So just also to understand, I think I said this before, but I'm going to say it one more time. When Jibril alayhi salam came to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, like, he's in the masjid, and Jibreel alayhi salam comes to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Did the Sahaba see Jibreel alayhi salam, yes or no? A human form, yes, that's the correct answer. So if he came as Dahya al-Kalbi, they would see him. But they would say, this is Dahya al-Kalbi, you understand? But if he came as Jibreel alayhi salam, the angel, of course they wouldn't see him. And the evidence is in many of the hadith of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Many of the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, right? So they knew that the wahy was coming to the Prophet ﷺ because of how he looked, Aisha radiallahu anha would say his body would get very heavy. He would start to sweat even on a very cold night. So they knew the signs of wahy, but they didn't see Jibreel alayhi salam, right? So, but this, they saw Dihya al-Kalbi, and the Prophet ﷺ said that was Jibreel leading the angels. And he said, يُزَلْزِلُ الْأَرْضَ مِنْ تَحْتَ أَقْدَامِهِم. He went ahead to shake the ground underneath. Incidentally, there's another narration where when Jibreel meets the Prophet ﷺ at his house, he says to him, I am going to throw fear in their hearts. I'm going to throw fear in their hearts. And here he says, يُزَلْزِلُ الْأَرْضَ مِنْ تَحْتَ أَقْدَامِهِم. And this was Jibreel alayhi salam. So as the Prophet ﷺ approaches the fort, Ali radiallahu anhu goes back and he stops the Prophet ﷺ from coming close. Why does he stop him from coming close? He doesn't want him to hear. He doesn't want him to hear. And he stops and he says, Ya Rasulullah, stay over here. Don't get any closer. And he says to Sayyidina Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he says, perhaps they're saying bad things about me. And Ali radiallahu anhu says, they are, Ya Rasulullah. He said, when I get there, they won't be able to say anything. And the Prophet ﷺ advances until he gets to the front lines of where Ali radiallahu anhu is. And then he says to them, aren't you humiliated? Like, isn't this over? Like it's game over, basically. And they say to him, they say back to the Prophet ﷺ, Ya Aba al-Qasim, they're now speaking to him in a form of respect. Ya Aba al-Qasim, you were never a person that acted foolishly. They know what they deserve, but they still want to stay on. They said you were never a person that acted foolishly. Okay. The siege laid around Banu Qurayza for around 25 days. So 25 days out in Ahzab, another 25 days siege of Banu Qurayza, right? Surrounding Banu Qurayza. And they came out and they said, we have food, we have weapons, we have money, you're never going to have us leave, you're all going to go away, and we're going to be the winners, and so on and so forth. This exchange is going on. And remember, who are the leaders that are inside? Ka'b ibn Asad was the leader of the Banu Qurayza. Who's the other one? Huyay ibn Akhtab. He was the leader of the Banu Nadir, and he's now stuck in the fort of the Banu Qurayza because he told him, if you stay, I'll stay with you. So he's stuck in the fort. Okay, so we have two major leaders of the Yahudis inside the fort. Ka'b ibn Asad says, he gathers his people, and he says, listen, you have three choices. You have three choices. He says, choice number one is accept this man's religion, and we all know that he's the one that has been predicted in our books. And they said, no, we're never going to accept his religion. And basically, he's like, if you accept Islam, if you take the Shahada, you're all going to be forgiven. This is how the Muslims are. This is how the Prophet ﷺ. They said, no, we're never going to leave our religion. Okay. He said, choice number two, which is a crazy choice. Let us kill our own families, and then we gather our weapons and we go and we attack them all together, right? And they said, no, we're not going to do that. Choice number three, they said, we're going to wait until the Sabbath comes. Remember the problem with the Sabbath that happened? The Sabbath. Their Sabbath. He said, wait until the Sabbath comes because the Muslims wouldn't expect us to attack on the Sabbath. And then we all go out in one charge and we attack the Muslims on the day of the Sabbath. And they said, no, this is a major sin. We don't fight on the Sabbath. And so he cursed at them and he said, Wallahi, since the day your mothers were born, none of you could make a decision. This is their leader saying to them this kind of thing. So they sent a delegation to the Prophet ﷺ. They're now like, let's talk. Let's negotiate. Okay? Let's negotiate. And they said, Ya Aba Qasim, give us the same deal that you gave the Banu Nadir. Give us the same deal you gave. What was the deal of Banu Nadir? Yeah, so take whatever you can on a single, and we said that they wrecked their houses and they took the doors, and he said no. He said no. It's absolute surrender. The Prophet ﷺ said no. So then they said to him, sent delegation one more time, said, keep everything, we won't take anything, and just let us all go. Prophet ﷺ said no. No, you can't leave. So then they said, we want someone that we can negotiate with from the Muslim side that we trust. So the person that was sent was called Abu Lubaba. Abu Lubaba. Does anyone know this name, Abu Lubaba? He's one of the Badriyin. He's one of the Badriyun. He was one of the people that participated in Badr, but he didn't fight. He's considered the Badri, and he got from the bounty of Badr, but he didn't fight because the Prophet ﷺ sent him on an errand at the time that the battle occurred. He was a Badri, Abu Lubaba, radiallahu anhu. So Abu Lubaba goes inside. And by the way, why did they pick Abu Lubaba? Because he was from their alliances at the time, from the Aus, in Jahiliyyah time. So we know that the Aus and the Khazraj were aligned to the Yahudi tribes as well, the Banu Qurayza and Banu Nadir. So he was sent to them. He goes inside, and all the women are crying, and all the children are crying. You can imagine what's going on inside. And his heart became soft. His heart, Abu Lubaba's heart, he became soft with him. And then they asked him, should we surrender? And Abu Lubaba said, yes, you should surrender. And then they asked him, what do you think will happen if we surrender? And Abu Lubaba went like this. And when he went like this, he felt like he betrayed the Prophet ﷺ. He just went like this. He felt that he committed a major betrayal to the Prophet ﷺ. We could talk a lot about just this position of Abu Lubaba, but does anyone know that in Arabic there's a term that you study in Usul al-Iman, and it's called al-wala' wal-bara'. Does anyone know what this means? Al-wala' wal-bara' in Islam. It means loyalties or alliances, and like who is your ally, who is your true friend in Islam, and who is your true enemy in Islam. So wali means a friend. Wali means someone you can trust. We are all awliya of each other, and Allah is our wali. Bara means people you want nothing to do with. And from when we say La ilaha illallah Muhammad Rasulullah, this becomes very clear. This concept of wala and bara in our mind should become it's very binary in our mind. You understand? And so Abu Lubaba radiallahu anhu, he demonstrates this, from what happens. And when he did this, he left the fort of the Banu Qurayza, and he went through the army, and he didn't even stop to speak to the Prophet ﷺ, and he went to the masjid of the Prophet ﷺ, and he tied himself to a pillar. So there's now two people in the masjid of the Prophet ﷺ. Let me see if you remember who they are. So Abu Lubaba is one, radiallahu anhu. Who's the second? Sa'd ibn Mu'adh radiallahu anhu in the little makeshift hospital, right? Both of them are in the masjid of the Prophet ﷺ. Abu Lubaba times himself, and he says, I shall remain tied to this pillar until Allah forgives me from what I did to them. He considered that a betrayal to the Prophet ﷺ. And the Prophet ﷺ asked, where is he? Where did he go? And they said he went back and he tied himself to the pillar because he said he won't let himself go until Allah forgives him. And the Prophet ﷺ said, if he had come to me, he would ask me, I would have forgiven him right away. But now, Abu Lubaba is in a situation where he said, Allah has to free me. What is this called in Islam? What is this called? I won't let myself go until Allah frees me. What is this called in Islam? Nadr. Has anyone heard that term? Nadr. Noon, Dal, Ra. يُوفُونَ بِالنَّذْرِ وَيَخَافُونَ يَوْمًا كَانَ شَرُّهُ مُسْتَطِيرًا. Nadr is when you say, for example, let's say, a sister or whatever says, when my daughter gets married, I'm going to give $1,000 in sadaqah. When my son gets an A, I'm going to give $500. You understand? This is called the nadr. The nadr is between you and Allah. There's no obligation on someone doing a nadr. That he obligated himself to the nadr when he went back and he tied himself to the masjid. You understand? So Abu Lubaba is now in the masjid attached to this nadr, right? The Prophet ﷺ one morning, just to finish the story of Abu Lubaba, after the Fajr prayer, he was smiling. He had a big laugh on his face. And Salama radiallahu anha, mother Salama, she says to the Prophet ﷺ, أَضْحَكَ اللَّهُ سِنَّكَ. By the way, this is the beautiful expression in Arabic. Like, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make all your days happy. She's saying this to the Prophet ﷺ. Like, why are you smiling? May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make all your days happy. And she says to him, and he says to her, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has just accepted the tawbah of Abu Lubaba. And Salama said, I wanted to go and tell him. By the way, Salama was the one that had a door open to the masjid also. Right? Her door was open to the masjid of the Prophet ﷺ. So it was, by the way, they were all closed except for which door? All the doors of our mothers, the wives of the Prophet ﷺ were closed except for which door? Hadith, Aisha radiallahu anha. All of them were closed except for the door of Aisha. Okay. So the Prophet ﷺ went to untie Abu Lubaba himself. Does anyone know the ayat in the Quran that were revealed about the forgiveness of Abu Lubaba? By most scholarly accounts, there's two of them. MashaAllah alayk. This is exactly one of them. That's the second one. So وآخرين اعترفوا بذنوبهم خلطوا عملا صالحا وآخر سيئا عسى الله أن يتوب عليهم إن الله. This is in Surah Al-Tawbah, and Hassan al-Basri says that this is one of the most hopeful ayat in the Quran. One of the most hopeful ayat in the Quran is this ayat. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَآخَرِينَ أَعْتَرَفُوا بِذُنُوبِهِمْ. And others, meaning from the Muslims, they acknowledge their mistakes. They acknowledge their mistakes to Allah. خَلَطُوا عَمَلًا صَالِحًا. They mixed deeds that were good with deeds that were bad. خَلَطُوا عَمَلًا صَالِحًا وَآخَرَ سَيِّئًا عَسَى اللَّهُ أَن يَتُوبَ عَلَيْهِمْ. May Allah have forgiveness on them. إِنَّ اللَّهَ غَفُورٌ رَحِيمٌ. Hassan al-Basri says, this is أرجى آية في كتاب الله. أرجى آية في كتاب الله. Ibn Abbas radiallahu anhu says, when you read in the Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying, Asa Allah, Asa Allah, mean Allah will do it. Asa Allah in Arabic means inshallah Allah will do it, right? The other ayah can be found in Surah Al-Anfal, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, يَا أَيُّهَا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا لَا تَخُونُوا اللَّهَ وَالرَّسُولَ وَتَخُونُوا أَمَانَتِكُمْ وَأَنْتُمْ تَعْلَمُونَ. So some of the ulama say that this is also the ayah about Abu Lubaba in this particular situation. So Abu Lubaba is forgiven. Okay. 25 days into this, the Muslim guards, so the fortress is seized, there's a siege around it. They hear a noise and they say, who is there? And one of the Yahudis leaves. This is, by the way, when they decide that it's over. And his name is Amr ibn Sa'da. Amr ibn Sa'da, he's one of the Yahudis. And the person that received him was a companion called Muhammad ibn Maslama. Muhammad ibn Maslama. So Amr ibn Sa'da, Amr ibn Sa'da was one of the Yahudis that rejected what Ka'b ibn As'ad was doing from the betrayal of the Prophet ﷺ. And he was vocal about it, but he was still stuck inside with the rest of the tribe. And he came to him and he basically said, look, I've been against this guy. And it seems like the Muslims knew about him. So Muhammad ibn Maslama basically let him go. He let him go, right? And he says, Muhammad ibn Muslim radiallahu anhu, he says, oh Allah, overlook my overlooking of him. Overlook my overlooking of him, right? He didn't catch him, he let him go. The Prophet ﷺ, when he found out that he let him go, he said, this man, the one that left the fort of Dhul, was saved by his honesty with Allah. He never accepted Islam, by the way. This person, we don't actually know what happened to him. He never accepted Islam. Like he leaves, and he basically went north and he disappeared. We actually have no history of what happened after him afterwards. But the Prophet ﷺ said his honesty is the one that saved him. This was a gift from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for him being saved. Okay. So the Aus now, the tribe of the Aus are also Ansar. They start to plead, they know what's going to happen. Like they're surrendering, they know what's going to happen. So the Aus start to play to plead with the Prophet ﷺ to forgive the Banu Qurayza in the same way that the Prophet ﷺ forgave the Banu Nadir. Who was the one that interceded on the behalf of Banu Nadir? Do you remember? Abdullah ibn Ubay ibn Salul, the head of the Munafiqeen. The head of the Munafiqeen was the leader of the Khazraj, and he went and he's the one that interceded, and he said, no one touched them, this and that, and the Prophet ﷺ let him go for the intercession of Abdullah ibn Ubay ibn Salul. And now the Ansar are saying to the Prophet ﷺ, you can imagine, Ya Rasulullah, they were our allies in the same way that you forgave them, forgive them. Right? And they're pleading with the Prophet ﷺ, and they say to him things like, we deserve the same treatment for our friends. And then the Prophet ﷺ, when he sees this, he says to them, will you be pleased if one of you decides their fate? And they say, yes, Ya Rasulullah. We'll be very pleased if someone from us decides their fate. So he calls for the leader, and the leader is Sa'd ibn Mu'adh radiallahu. The leader is the one that's in the hospital, in the masjid of the Prophet ﷺ, because he was hit by the arrow. And the artery is now bleeding, right? The artery is now bleeding, right? And he calls Sa'd ibn Mu'adh radiallahu anhu, and they're imploring the Prophet ﷺ. Now, when they hear that Sa'd ibn Mu'adh radiallahu anhu is coming, they're happy, and they start to implore Sa'd ibn Mu'adh radiallahu anhu to let them go. So they now know that look at the human. By the way, this is not just, this is the Prophet ﷺ. Look at his amazing leadership, even in the sense of human leadership. Like the Prophet ﷺ could have said, no, I'm making the decision. And they would have had to listen. You understand? They would have had to listen. But he doesn't do that. Look at his wisdom. So he calls from one of their own, and they now start to plead with him. And he gets now to the Banu Qurayza, and they're pleading and pleading and pleading. And Sa'ad radiallahu anhu says out loud to everyone that can hear, he says, now is the time for Sa'ad not to be concerned about any critics. This is the time he says this to himself, this is the time not to be concerned with any of my critics, and I'm only going to demonstrate the sincerity to Allah and His Messenger. I'm only going to demonstrate sincerity to Allah and His Messenger. And they knew that, the rest of his tribe knew that this was over, right? And the Prophet ﷺ says the following when Sa'd ibn Mu'adh gets there. He says, قُومُوا إِلَى سَيِّدِكُمْ. Does anyone know this hadith? قُومُوا إِلَى سَيِّدِكُمْ. Okay. Stand up for your leader, mashallah. Okay, let's now have another fiqh conversation. Okay. Stand up for your leader. So, we all do this, by the way. So, I do this. We're invited at, what's your name? Sa'id. We're invited at Sa'id's house for dinner. His father, mashallah, is paying, and he's getting us all both, mashallah. Okay. So we're invited at Sa'id's house for dinner, and Sa'id, mashallah, has a big lamb, and, like Muslims, like any good Muslims do, we don't get there on time. Some people get there at 6 o'clock, some people get there at 6:15, some people get there at 6:30, some people get there at 7, some people get there for suhoor, and Sa'id is patiently waiting. And the lamb is there, and people come in, and some brother comes in, we get up, shake the hand, give them a hug, right? We get up, shake the hand, give them a hug. Is that a bad thing? Is that a bad thing to do? Okay, let's go back. Haram, halal, makruh, Bismillah. Any opinions? Halal. There's nothing wrong with that. You understand? There's nothing wrong with that. Okay. Let's say someone comes into the house of Sa'id, who's this would be no one that Sa'id knows. So, let's say someone else's house, right? Your neighbor's house, whatever. And they come in and they say, "You're all sitting down. Get up." You understand? Get up for me. How could you be saying you're eating his lamb while I'm here? You understand the difference. You understand the difference. So the Prophet ﷺ teaches us. He says, look, if you get up out of respect for someone from time to time, you have an someone famous, there's nothing wrong with that. But for someone on the inside to feel you have to get up every time I show up, this is what is haram. The Prophet ﷺ actually says this kind of person, when is in hellfire, they feel that they're so important that every time they go to Sa'id's house, everyone has to get up. That's not how it's said. The Prophet ﷺ never asked the companions to get up for him even, right? Okay. So, but in this case, he says, "Qumu ila sayyidina," out of respect for Sa'd ibn Mu'adh radiallahu anhu, but also because he's about to do what? Make what? Fill in the blank. Judgment. The judge is now going to make a judgment on what's going to happen to the Banu Qurayza. You understand? Qumu ila sayyidina. Okay. So, but by the way, there are other situations where in the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ where he gets up for someone. For his daughter, mashallah, what was her name? Fatima. He gets up for all the companions. He hugs her and he kisses her on the head. Right? This is from the manners of the Prophet ﷺ. Okay. The Prophet ﷺ says to Sayyidina Sa'd ibn Mu'adh, we're almost done, don't worry, inshallah. He says, these people have accepted that you be the judge over them. They have accepted that you be the judge over them. And he says, so Sa'd ibn Mu'adh, he says to them, he says, "Unashidukum billah, will you obey me?" He says this to his own tribe first, and they said, yes, we will. And out of respect for the Prophet ﷺ, he turns his head towards the direction where the Prophet ﷺ is standing, lowers it, and he says something to the effect of, and anyone on this side. Like he means the Prophet ﷺ, and the Prophet ﷺ says, yes, I accept. Yes, I accept. So Sa'd ibn Mu'adh radiallahu anhu, he basically says, here is the judgment. The fighting men were going to be executed. The women and the property will be distributed, and the women and the women will be captured. Right? This is judgment. And what did the Prophet ﷺ say? He says, Allahu Akbar more. This is from the decree of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala from seventh heaven. Now remember, this is the outcome of treachery. This has nothing to do with who they were, has nothing to do with their deen. This is basically a stab in the back, treachery in the middle of war. Right? When a country catches a spying on another country in the middle of war, this is what they do to them. Okay? So it says, لَقَدْ حَكَمْتَ فِيهِمْ بِحُكْمِ اللَّهِ مِنْ فَوْقِ سَبْعِ سَمَاوَاتٍ. So they now start to bring them up. And you can understand what happens, but let me just talk about some of the interesting characters that came from the enemy side. One of them is Huyay ibn Akhtab. Remember Huyay ibn Akhtab? He's the one that kicked off the whole Ahzab. He's the leader of the Nadir. He comes out in his finest piece of clothing. Super expensive piece of clothing. But the interesting thing is, what did he do? He tied it with a really tight rope to his body so no one could take it off of him after he dies. Okay? He ties it up to his body. And he has strings around it. And he says this to the Prophet ﷺ. He says, Wallahi, I have never regretted any animosity towards you. He says this directly to the Prophet ﷺ. And then he says the following. He says, whoever Allah humiliates, that is one that is truly humiliated. He says this in front of all the people. So this is Huyay ibn Akhtab. Ka'b ibn As'ad was the leader of the Banu Qurayza. When he sees the Prophet ﷺ, the Prophet ﷺ says, "O Ka'b, why didn't you take the advice of Ibn Kharraj?" Did I know this name, Ibn Kharraj? Ibn Kharraj used to be one of their head rabbis that died before the arrival of the Prophet ﷺ. Right? So we know that who was alive at the time of the Prophet ﷺ became the grand faqih of Medina. What was his name? Abdullah ibn Salam. Abdullah ibn Salam. Right? Ibn Kharraj was someone that was before Abdullah ibn Salam. He told them that a messenger is coming from here. The description is in the Torah. When he comes, if I'm not alive, number one, accept his deen. Number two, give my salams from me. If I'm not here, you give salams on my behalf. So the Prophet ﷺ asks Ka'b ibn As'ad, why did you not do that? And he basically said, I swear by Allah that I would have accepted your deen, but I was too afraid from my people that they would kill me. I was too afraid from my people. Who said something like this? We may have covered this last year. Do you know? Hang on. Go ahead. Abu Talib didn't accept Islam, but yes, it was a similar type of tendency. So you're on the right path. But who said a statement identical to this? MashaAllah, Hiraq. So the Amir Wufud after Hudaybiyah, when the Prophet ﷺ sent the letters, Hiraql was not just the king of the Romans, but he was also faqih of the Bible. You understand? And he said, this is the true messenger, and I'm going to follow his deen. And his people almost revolted against him and killed him. And he said, no. I was just joking. I changed my mind. I only did this to see if you guys are committed to fight him, yes or no. Hiraql did the exact same thing. Remember, the last hadith in the first book of Bukhari is exactly that hadith. The hadith of Hiraql, interrogating the delegation from Mecca, which included who? Abu Sufyan, radiallahu anhu, before he became a Muslim, right? Okay. So Hiraql said something similar. And subhanAllah, you see this even in people today. Wallahi, brothers and sisters, I can tell you, there's a class I teach at MAPS on Friday night. And it started off as a converts class. It's now kind of evolved to, we call it Muslim experience, different things. But there's a brother that comes to attend this class. He's probably been coming to this class for probably 15 years. 15 years. Won't say the Shahada. He comes to the class, takes notes, writes everything. He can answer all the questions. Refuses to take the Shahada. Just refuses to take the Shahada, right? Ashab is the hidayah from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And you never know people's intentions. Like you never know people, what's going on in their minds. SubhanAllah. Okay, so this was Ka'b ibn As'ad. Aisha radiallahu anha says hadith also about the people of Banu Qurayza. She says there was a woman that was also captured, and she was joking and laughing hysterically as her tribe was being rolled out. A woman from the Banu Qurayza. Until her name was called. Aisha radiallahu anha said, I didn't know her name was called. She was probably the only one that was kept from the women because she killed a companion from the fort. And she was laughing the whole time that this was going on. Another thing that happened was a companion called Thabit ibn Qais ibn Shammas. He participated in the battles of Br.Aala. Does anyone remember what the battles of Br.Aala were? The battles of Br.Aala, or the wars of Br.Aala. They were the wars between the Aus and the Khazraj before the hijrah of the Prophet ﷺ. So battles of Br.Aala occurred in Medina, what the time was called Yathrib, between the Aus and the Khazraj. And each of the Yahudi tribes was allied to the Aus or to the Khazraj, and they were fighting each other. And this particular companion, radiallahu anhu, his life was saved by one of the Yahudis of the Banu Qurayza, right? His name was Zayd al-Quradi. Anyway, and And he saw him coming out. So he said to him, do you want me to intercede on your behalf with the Prophet ﷺ? And he said, yes. So he went to the Prophet ﷺ, Thabit ibn Qais, and he says to him, Ya Rasulullah, I want to keep him. I want to, because this is what he rescued me in the battles of Badr. And the Prophet ﷺ said, you can keep him. And he goes back to Zayd and he says to him, Zayd says to him, can I keep my family? So he goes, I'm going to ask the Prophet ﷺ. So he goes back to the Prophet ﷺ, can he keep his family? Can I keep my family? I'll keep his family. He said, yes. So he goes back to him, he says, yes. He says, can I keep my money? So he goes back to the Prophet ﷺ. He said, can I keep his money? And he said, yes, you can keep his money. So Zubayr then starts to ask him, what happened to so-and-so? He had the death penalty. What happened to so-and-so? He had the death penalty. What happened to so-and-so? He had the death penalty. He said, I'm not interested. I'm not going to take your deal. He said, I'm not interested in any of this. You should just take me as well. He said, the only thing I ask is, you're the one that does the execution. So this is another one of them. Some of the Banu Qurayza actually accepted Islam and were saved. Some of the people of the Banu Qurayza accepted, they took the Shahada and they were spared. One or two other cases, the Shafa'ah was also accepted. So very few, but Shafa'ah was accepted on behalf of the Ansar, right, on one or two people, and they were accepted of the Prophet ﷺ. How many people were actually executed of the Banu Qurayza? Ibn Ishaq says 600 to 700. Others say 800 to 900. Muslim Imam Ahmad says about 400. Right? The Muslims took as a ghanima 1,500 swords, 1,500 shields, 2,000 spears, 300 body armor, thousands and thousands of sheep and goats. And what do you think was the other really big thing that they had on the inside? Yeah. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, هو الذي أنزل الذين كفروا من أهل الكتاب من صياصيهم فريقا تقتلون وتأسرون فريقا وأورثكم أرضهم وديارهم وأموالا وأرضا لم تطئوها. Right? Okay. What do you think was also inside? This is exactly that. That ayah is exactly about what we're reading now. Right? This ayah, mashallah. Alcohol. They found a ton of alcohol. Right? That the Sahaba, of course, got rid of and destroyed. Now, this was the first time, I don't know if you remember in Anfal, when we covered Badr, we covered Anfal, and we said Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was starting to talk about the rules of Ghanima. The first time the rules of Ghanima were actually fully implemented were actually after Ahzab. And so the horsemen got 3 times the share of the infantrymen. The horsemen got 3 times the share. Why do you think the horsemen got 3 times the share? That's right, because the share of the horse. The share of the horse is important, right? The share, and of course you understand that these are volunteers. These are not like paid professionals. You understand, right? So to pay for the horse, and 1/5 of it, where does the 1/5 go? What's that called in today's terms? What do you pay every month from your paycheck? Right? So 1/5 of it goes to, mashallah, to cover the schools, the 1/5 of it goes to the Prophet, which is meant to be for the yatim and the miskin. Of course, what you're saying is correct. Okay, the Prophet ﷺ. We'll just close with this one. By the way, where is this ayah? 1/5 of it goes to Allah and His Messenger. Anfal, mashallah, Anfal. So Rayhana, the Prophet ﷺ takes, under him someone called Rayhana, and she refused Islam. She refused to accept Islam, 100%. So the Prophet ﷺ wasn't interested in keeping her, and he said he's basically going to give her away. And he actually offered her. He said, I'll marry you, I will free you, and your mahr will be your freedom. Right? Your mahr will be your freedom. And she said, no, I want to remain milk al-yamin. She said, no, I want to be milk al-yamin. This is one of the things that happened after this. So I just want to go back. Why did this happen? Situation with the Banu Qurayza? Because of their treachery. This was, again, and we have to understand this, and we don't have to be apologists about it. When treachery occurs, this is the outcome of the treachery, right? In any modern day terms. And so may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala inshallah give this ummah victory. We'll continue next week inshallah. Allahumma ighfir lana warhamna anta khairur rahimin. ربنا ظلمنا أنفسنا وإن لم تغفر لنا وترحمنا لنكونن من الخاسرين. اللهم زدنا علما وارزقنا فهما. اللهم تقبل منا إنك أنت السميع العليم وتب علينا إنك أنت التواب الرحيم. اللهم نسألك رضاك والجنة ونعوذ بك من سخطك والنار. اللهم إنك عفو كريم تحب العفو فاعف عنا. اللهم ارحم ضعفنا ويمن كتابنا واغفر ذنوبنا واختم بالباقيات الصالحات أعمالنا. اللهم اغفر لنا ولآبائنا وأمهاتنا وارحمهما كما ربنا صغارا. وآخر دعوانا أن الحمد لله رب العالمين. جزاكم الله خيرا. We'll see you next week. So good to see you. It's been a while.